Helen, welcome to the World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. Hamas says it is carrying out what it calls a thorough review of a U.S. plan for a ceasefire in Gaza. China slams Washington's plans to revoke students' visas for Chinese nationals in response to aggression from China. Plus, scores of people die in floods in Niger State, Nigeria. Let's begin the World Today. We're beginning in Gaza today as the Hamas militant group says it is reviewing a U.S. plan for a ceasefire in the enclave, but says it fails to meet its core demands. The White House says Israel has signed off on the deal that reportedly proposes a 60-day truce and the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Israel has yet to officially comment. A previous two-month ceasefire collapsed in March when Israel imposed a total blockade on Gaza and resumed its military offensive. Almost 4,000 people have been killed in Gaza since then, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Israel says it's acting to destroy Hamas and return hostages. In the meantime, there have been 72 deaths and 278 injured in Gaza over the past day, so says the Hamas-run health ministry. The ministry also says that these numbers do not include hospitals in the north of Gaza due to difficulty in accessing them. The UN's Human Rights Office says nearly 50 people were injured when crowds overwhelmed a new aid distribution center run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in Rafah. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has released an update saying the report is inaccurate. Meanwhile, sentiment over the war in Gaza continues in Paris, France. Activists poured red dye into Fontaine des Innocents, turning the water blood red to symbolize what they described as a bloodbath in Gaza and to condemn the war. Campaigners from multiple organizations, including Oxfam, Greenpeace, Amnesty International, and other NGOs, scaled the historic fountain before pouring the dye into its basin. Protesters stood alongside the fountain holding signs that read "Ceasefire" and "Gaza, stop the bloodbath." Earlier on Thursday, the White House said that Israel had signed off on a 60-day ceasefire proposal. In May, French President Emmanuel Macron called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's actions unacceptable and shameful following the blockade of humanitarian aid into the enclave. Netanyahu responded by accusing Macron of aligning himself with a murderous Islamist terrorist organization. Israel's military operations in the enclave resumed on March 18, following a ceasefire agreement with Hamas that included an exchange of captives on both sides. Three different courts have ruled on President Donald Trump's tariff plans over the last 2 days. Two lower courts blocked most of the tariff plan taking effect. However, on Thursday, an appeals court let the Trump administration continue collecting tariffs, especially freezing the status quo as judges consider the case. White House advisor Peter Navarro says the Trump tariff agenda is alive, well, healthy, and will be implemented. Navarro says the Trump administration will continue with its tariff plan, whether the courts approve or not. On Wednesday, a federal court stopped most of the tariffs President Trump announced in April. A court blocked the baseline 10% tariff, the up to 50% reciprocal tariff, and the tariffs meant to stop fentanyl. It did not affect tariffs on cars, car parts, steel, and aluminum. On Thursday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, said the Trump administration faced another example of judicial overreach following the Court of International Trade ruling. Well, in response to China's in response to the U.S., imposing students' visa restrictions on Chinese students. The Chinese government has slammed Washington's plans to revoke those visas for the Chinese nationals in response to aggression from China. Well, Jiang was speaking during a press conference, that's the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China, saying U.S. remarks reek of ideological bias and Cold War zero-sum mentality, adding any attempts to smear and attack the Communist Party of China, vilify China's path and system, and stoke division and hostility between CPC and the Chinese people are delusional and presumptuous. It comes after President Trump's administration paused visa interviews for foreign students while it prepared for an expansion of social media vetting. We'll have more of this in a minute. But Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum is also pushing back on the U.S. government's decision to temporarily suspend interviews abroad for student and exchange visa applications. She addressed the matter on Thursday at a press conference, saying, "We do not agree with this policy related to enhanced screening for students." President Sheinbaum stated during her press conference that her government will conduct an assessment to determine how many Mexican students could be affected in their efforts to enter the United States. The suspension of interviews announced by the Trump administration on Tuesday follows protests on U.S. university campuses against Israel's attack on Gaza, many led by foreign students. The U.S. government is now restricting entry to individuals who support pro-Palestinian demonstrations or are linked to activities it considers anti-Semitic. The impact this policy may have on thousands of foreign students remains unclear. More now on the restrictions on Chinese students. The Trump administration did confirm a visa policy shift, warning that Chinese nationals will face repeated vetting as Washington moves to counter the Chinese Communist Party's exploitation of American universities. The U.S. Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce stressed that the country will not tolerate exploitation of U.S. universities or theft of research. She claims the revocations will target Chinese students as warranted, including those with connections to the CCP or studying in critical fields, also confirming the scrutiny would extend to all Chinese nationals, including Hong Kong passport holders.
The United States is putting America first by beginning to revoke visas of Chinese students as warranted, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party, as you mentioned, Matt, or studying in critical fields, and enhancing scrutiny of visas for all Chinese nationals, including Hong Kong passport holders. The United States, I further can say here, will not tolerate the CCP's exploitation of U.S. universities or theft of U.S. research, intellectual property, or technologies to grow its military power, conduct intelligence collection, or repress voices of opposition. The Trump administration is focused on protecting our nation and our citizens by upholding our national security and public safety. Well, again, and as reporters here all and curious people, you know the nature of what China has been doing about, with technology, right, stealing information, intellectual property, U.S. research, copyrights, etc. This is not new or confusing, and this is one way that we certainly can try to mitigate that issue. I think everyone who's here on a visa has to recognize, certainly is what they've seen over the last few months, that America takes their visas seriously, that vetting is not a one-time process, it's continuing. And that if things happen, if you get arrested, if there's some kind of an issue, it's probably going to be seen at some point. But I do think that with this particular dynamic, it's clear that there's an interest in making sure that those who are here from China on a visa understand that we are taking our national security seriously, and we are looking at their visas.
Over in Germany, the new government has moved forward with its plans to restrict immigration. This week, it approved restrictions on family reunification for certain groups of refugees and tightened citizenship laws. For more now, we're joined by Chiponda Chimbelu, a correspondent with our partners Deutsche Welle in Berlin. Chiponda, what does this mean?
Well, the government's move stops family members of refugees with subsidiary protection status from moving to Germany. Now, people with subsidiary protection status are individuals who do not meet the specific criteria for refugee status under the Geneva Convention, but still face the risk of serious harm in their countries of origin. And there are currently just over 350,000 people who have that status in Germany. They have the right to live here for up to 3 years. That also gives them the right to work in Germany and also access social benefits. Now, Germany's new government is planning to restrict family reunification for this group, and it also has made another change to immigration policy. It is scrapping the fast-track citizenship, the rule that allowed people who are well integrated to get German citizenship just after 3 years of living here.
But why has the government made this move, and why now?
Well, immigration is a hot topic among German voters. And of course, the Conservatives, who are part of the ruling coalition, promised to clamp down on it ahead of the federal elections last February. Now, the government says it is making these changes to reduce the number of people fleeing to Germany. But it does say the country is still open to people who come through so-called legal migration. And that is, of course, regular migration. Germany does, after all, need younger workers to replace an aging population. But of course, getting the balance right on immigration rhetoric is tricky. And there are surveys here in Germany that show that immigrants, especially black and brown immigrants, are feeling more unwelcome in Germany because of the ongoing rhetoric on immigration. So the government will need to strike the right note. And it will need to do that, of course, while making changes that may very well be needed, such as reducing government spending on social services for refugees.
So how much support is there for the changes, Chiponda?
Well, an expert council on integration and migration welcomed the decision to end the fast-track citizenship. It does say that ending that corrects the impression that it is easy to get German citizenship. And the same council, though, did criticize the suspension of family reunification for some refugees. And churches and charities, too, have also been critical. In fact, an organization that lobbies for refugee rights called it a family destruction law because it is tearing families apart, it says. Now, the Green Party and the Left Party have also criticized the suspension of family reunification. But the biggest opposition party, as can be expected, the far-right AfD, says that the changes to immigration policy do not go far enough.
Thanks again, Chiponda. And we'll take a short break now on The World Today. Coming up after the break, the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. reopens with calls for peace and renewed condemnation of anti-Semitism after Israeli embassy staff members were shot dead on May 21st. Do stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. India says more than 1,000 people have come back or been deported from the United States since January. Spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry, Randir Jaswal, says that around 62% of them came on commercial flights without providing more details. It comes in the wake of President Donald Trump's campaign against undocumented migrants to the United States. Trump had earlier said that India will do what is right on the deportation of illegal migrants. In February, the U.S. had deported more than 100 Indians on a U.S. military flight, with reports saying that some of them were brought back shackled. In total, the U.S. is said to have identified about 18,000 Indian nationals it believes entered the country illegally. Earlier this month, the U.S. Embassy in India issued a warning that overstaying in the U.S. could lead to deportation or a permanent ban on entry in the country, even for those who entered legally. Well, the last 24 hours have been confusing in the United States with the court rulings on whether or not Trump tariffs stay and if they will continue to affect countries. Here to help us make sense of it all is our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird. Maria, what is the last word from the courts about the Trump administration's use of tariffs?
Yes, well, you're right. This has been a very interesting 48 hours. And so at this time, the Court of Appeals has put a stay on the tariffs that President Trump put forth. So at this time, the tariffs are still in place. There has not been a blockage on them, even though we know the U.S. International Court had put a temporary stop on that. But also it's clear to note that even though right now the tariffs are able to move forward and the Trump administration tariffs are fully in place again, this is only temporary. And so we could potentially see greater challenges in the coming weeks around the tariffs. It's a very interesting dynamic here. We know that there have been calls before by small businesses to state that these tariffs are drastically impacting their business, their ability to continue their businesses. And so there has been some economic red flags that have been raised as a result of the tariffs. But at this time, the tariffs are still in place, and we can expect to see more notices or more further legal actions over the next week or so, especially as the U.S. International Court will likely respond.
Yes, and in its previous ruling, the court did say the tariffs were an overreach and that there was a brief respite, I know, for many companies in the U.S. and probably for some countries, but it also stuck with that ruling. What would it mean? What would it have meant for the administration and for the many U.S. companies just hanging on and waiting for some news of relief for them with this tariffs?
Right. Companies are not quite sure which way to move. We know there have been elevated prices across the board. We know that very large companies like Walmart have been drastically impacted by the tariffs and are looking for ways to ensure that they can keep prices low. But we have seen inflation amongst many of their products across the board. We also know the Trump administration has been very clear on their strategy. They've been very clear that the U.S. is not going to be in a position where it is reducing tariffs but still paying tariffs, and other global economies and other countries are providing tariffs upon us. And so I think that is the strategy that he has been putting forth. His strategy is that they're bringing people back to the table, which we've seen many countries come to the table to negotiate with him. And this is going to continue to be his strategy, despite the fact that we have seen that there have been lawsuits brought against these tariffs that have been put in place. The real question, though, is we know that the U.S. is made up of small business. We know that the highest employer, the largest employer of the U.S. in workforce are small businesses. And so if these businesses are being impacted, unfortunately or directly by these tariffs, that is going to be something that's going to call to question and it's going to be put before the Trump administration to respond to. And so the small businesses are pushing the needle on this, and we will definitely see some back and forth over the next few days and weeks ahead. But as we know, if China and the U.S. are able to come to an agreement, much of what we're experiencing today will definitely be something that will have a benefit not only for the Trump administration as they've tried to bring people to the table, but also to those small businesses that are feeling the pain of the tariffs at this time.
Just to remind our viewers what we're talking about, it's one of our lead stories today, and that is three different courts ruling on President Donald Trump's tariff plan over the last 2 days. Two lower courts, as it stands, blocked most of the tariff plan from taking effect, but on Thursday, an appeals court let the Trump administration continue collecting tariffs, essentially freezing the status quo as judges consider the case. So back to Maria now. Right now, the tariffs remain in place, from the last ruling of the court. I wonder how far the Trump administration has gone with negotiating those numbers with countries affected by the tariffs. Remember, some weeks back, the Trump administration had said a number of countries were calling the White House and trying to negotiate those tariffs. What is the status now?
India have been coming to the table. We know that there has been even some redirection of production for companies like Apple and having some of their chips produced in India. And so there have been various countries coming to the table. We have definitely seen a slowdown over the past few weeks around more countries coming to the table. We know the big question of the day and really where I think many Americans are waiting to see what will happen with the China and U.S. Trade relationships and trade conversations. That is going to be key and critical. We know how much of a supplier of goods China is to the United States. We know how much the U.S. purchases from China, and we also know that there's a reciprocal in that as well. And so the biggest concern now is really around how that conversation is going to go, and if the Trump administration is going to be able to bring China back to the table and come up with an agreement that will allow and release some of the tension and pressure that exists on many companies
Maria,
and consumers.
Indeed. And while we have you here, I wonder if you could speak about the visa vetting process for international students and how the pause in visa issuance could impact processes around the world.
This is, I think, one that I can't say it's unexpected, but it's one I think that is of great concern. We know how many students are coming each and every year into the United States from across the world, but specifically as we're speaking of China directly. This is going to be something that I think many universities are going to be concerned about. You're going to begin to see them speak out more directly if they have not already spoken out around this. I know that there will probably be some collaboration between institutions around how this could be impacting the U.S. As a whole. And as you mentioned, globally, we know that the U.S. and China have not only exchanged trade, but also exchanged intellectual property back and forth over the years. We know that this around research and much of the work that the U.S. and China have done over the years is very much based in some of the relationships around student visas and students being here and that exchange back and forth. And so I think this is going to be of concern not only to those institutions, but it's going to be a concern to Americans as a whole. And so how this will impact, I think we'll really be able to see that impact once it actually happens. I think this is unexpected from the standpoint of what we could potentially see and how devastating it could be. But once again, the Trump administration has been very clear that they are holding a very strong stance as it relates to immigration, as it relates to who's allowed to be in the U.S. We also know that there have been concerns around the way in which things have been exchanged in intellectual property between the U.S. and China, and potentially even things that could have an adverse effect on the security of the United States. And so that's really where the premise of the administration. And so we'll see how the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is able to address this further, and if this is going to just be temporary or something that we experienced for many weeks and months ago.
But right now, Maria, even those with valid student visas in the U.S. are not immune to ICE checks. A number of them have been picked up and taken to detention centers. What can you tell us about the status of international students in the United States as it stands?
I think there's not an oversweeping concern as far as their safety and security. Could there be some potential checks, as you mentioned? Could they be experiencing additional level of scrutiny than traditionally has happened? Yes, I think that is definitely for sure. But I do think that there's not an overarching concern for those students that are here on visas that are approved and that they have valid dates for their stay in the United States. But again, we are in unprecedented times as it relates to visas, as it relates to being able to be in the U.S. and some of the concerns that many people have around ICE checks. We have seen ICE checks adversely impact those who are even here in the United States legally. But I think from a broad sweeping brush, we're not looking at where we're seeing many people ended up experiencing negative impacts of ICE, even if they're here legally with student visas.
How are the universities reacting? So far, I think it's only Harvard that's been in the eye of the storm with the Trump administration, but that's all for a different reason regarding policy.
Yeah, so universities are going to begin to speak out around this as they begin to really understand the ramifications. I think that it's still unclear exactly what are all the targeted components to it, how to prepare their student populations, and also how to directly respond. And so we're actually in a period of time now where most institutions are on their summer break, and so they probably will be spending the next couple of weeks and months being able to really figure out how this will impact them and how they should respond. But as we know, the international student population in the United States is a large part of the higher education community, and so they are going to definitely be clear to look into exactly what the statutes are going to state and how this could impact in ensuring the safety and security of their students being able to come back to their campuses.
Thanks again, Maria. Appreciate your breaking this down for us and helping us to understand what exactly the Trump administration intends to do with the tariffs, what the courts have said, and of course the status of international students in the United States. Thanks again. Well, back here in Africa, in 2024 alone, countries lost an estimated $67.5 million in non-refundable Schengen visa application fees, according to data from Lago Collective. The London-based research has tracked European short-term visa trends since 2022 and identifies Africa as the region most adversely impacted by visa rejections. Professor Lauren Landau from Wits University of South Africa says that these losses represent more than just financial strain, and they highlight a deeper issue of access, equity, and mobility for African citizens seeking opportunities abroad. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Amosa, has more.
We decided to reduce the policy rate by 25 basis points with effect from the 30th of May. 5 members favored this action, while 1 preferred a cut of 50 basis points.
To apologize. We'll bring you that report as soon as we can. India says the issue of trade did not come up in its discussion with the U.S. during the clashes between the Indian and Pakistani militaries, virtually rejecting Washington's repeated claims that its offer of trade to two sides stopped the conflict. New Delhi's fresh assertion came in the wake of U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick telling a New York court that India and Pakistan reached a tenuous ceasefire only after President Donald Trump offered both nations trading access with the U.S. to avert a full-scale war. In the last few weeks, Mr. Trump has also repeatedly claimed that he threatened India and Pakistan that the U.S. will stop trade with the two nations if they do not stop the conflict. On Thursday, India said the issue of trade did not come up in its discussions with the U.S. during the clashes between the Indian and Pakistani militaries, virtually rejecting Washington's repeated claims that its offer of trade to the two sides stopped the conflict. New Delhi's fresh assertion came in the wake of U.S. Commerce Secretary telling a New York court that India and Pakistan reached a tenuous ceasefire only after President Trump offered both nations trading access with the U.S. to avoid a full-scale war.
There were conversations between Indian and U.S. leaders on the evolving military situation. The issue of trade or tariff did not come up in any of those discussions. External Affairs Minister has also made clear that the cessation of firing was decided upon through direct contacts between the DGMOs of India and Pakistan. The India-US bilateral trade agreement negotiations are going on. We just had a team visiting the United States. So we'll have to wait for the negotiations to come to conclusion, and as in we have an update, we'll share with you. But this is an ongoing matter, so you'll have to bear it with us. As also on trade negotiations, I told you that these are ongoing matters, and hopefully we will have something to update you as and when things come to a fruition. We have seen reports suggesting U.S. government's updated guidance regarding student and exchange visitor visa applicants. The welfare of Indian students abroad remains of utmost priority to the Government of India. We will continue to follow further developments in this regard. While we note that issuance of visa is a sovereign function, we hope that the application of Indian students will be considered on merit and they will be able to join their academic programs on time. 2023-24, 330,000 students were there. This year, 330,000 students. This year, the updated figure we don't have, because we are talking about 2023-24. For updated figures, you can also visit the relevant websites of the US government. Possibly you'll get it there. On student visa matters, there we made a point that while it is a sovereign function, we expect and we hope that Indian students, application of Indian students will be considered on merit, and they'll be able to join their courses, their academic programs in the United States on time. There are other categories of visas which are also issued, and hopefully these are functions which lie in the sovereign domain, and we should be respectful of them.
Indian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Randir Jaiswal. To mark the International Peacekeepers Day, the United Nations Global Service Center in Italy has hosted a robotics competition and tech fair for over 300 students from across the Puglia region. 10 schools formed 23 teams tasked with building robots to solve real-world humanitarian challenges. Students aged 11 to 17 worked for months with teachers and UN mentors, developing robots with teamwork and innovation. The event wrapped up with an awards ceremony and a message from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres emphasizing the need for peacekeeping that is ready for today's realities and tomorrow's challenges.
We have provided the school with some electronic kits composed by microcontrollers and sensors, but they were free to use whatever robots they want. So some schools came with the Lego kit, some other used ours, some other built from their own. So the only limit was their imagination. Events like these are important to inspire the youngest generation to apply engineering, electronics, computer science to real situation. And this was the case where they shown their passion in these kind of areas.
We took advantage of the experiences in other events during the school year. In fact, we went to RoboCup in Pescara and RomaCup in Rome. The material received was used to modify the projects created in other competitions to adapt it to this one. It was important because it has stimulated us to improve and face a new situation in an international context.
So I really like it because I learn every day something new. For example, I learn how to program and how the robots work. We also learn about the wires and the motors of the wheels. We learned a lot of things. The best part was actually competing, because we could actually try everything we worked for. It was really fun, and I also liked when we got our trophies, because I felt a new emotion. It was really fun and also exciting at the same moment.
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has met with Kazakh President Kassym Jomart Tokayev in Astana, praising the strength of the two countries' relationship and committing to deeper cooperation. Tokayev said the leaders held very productive talks on so many issues and expressed confidence that their partnership would be extremely multifaceted. Meloni emphasized Kazakhstan's strategic role in the region, calling it a crossroads of history of continents of West and East, and personally commended the president. Both leaders expressed optimism about expanding cooperation in areas such as raw materials, energy, defense, and culture.
We intend to seal the friendship that unites our nations with concrete facts by enhancing our strategic collaboration on many crucial fields. And this visit also marks a historic moment in our relations, the first summit between Italy and the 5 Central Asian nations. Italy was the first nation in the EU to decide to invest in relation with Central Asia and its individual member nation, launching a permanent format in order to share ideas. We have shown the way, and our example has indeed led the path, as proven by the first EU Central Asia Summit last April, which not surprisingly elevated the relations between the region and the European Union to a strategic partnership. We are proud of this choice, since the capacity to create bridges and opportunities for dialogue by exploring avenues that others have not had the courage to pursue is in the DNA of Italian people. This is a legacy we learned from one of the most famous Italians in history, Marco Polo, who centuries ago crossed these lands to reach the farthest borders in the then known world. I'm not a geopolitical scholar, but I simply observe reality. And reality tells us this region has always been a crossroads between the West and the East, and occupies a strategic role in the global scenario, moreover, in difficult times, as those we are in. Central Asia has always been a bridge.
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles today met with his U.S. counterpart Pete Hegseth during the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore as global defence leaders gather to address the future of security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. The annual Shangri-La dialogue, hosted by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, is Asia's leading security forum, bringing together top military officials from the Five Eyes Alliance, ASEAN and beyond. Hegseth's speech at the forum is expected to outline Washington's stance on Taiwan, the South China Sea and regional economic stability.
We're in touch regularly, just a long-standing, incredibly important partnership with our friends in Australia. And it's as strong and true today as it's ever been. I saw it in person in Afghanistan, working alongside Australians who became not just fellow warriors, but friends, and that at the highest levels continues. And so we look forward to the conversation here in finding places for you.
Well, and it's great to see you again, Pete. We had a really fantastic first meeting in DC back in February.
Yeah.
And you paid me the great compliment of being the first of your foreign counterparts that you met. And one of the things that really struck me when I first met Pete was what you just said then, that when you gave service in Afghanistan, you spoke about having worked alongside Australian service personnel. And it really does speak to the depth of the relationship between Australia and the United States, but the defence relationship between Australia and the United States. It couldn't have been a better first meeting between the two of us. We're really, as a government, excited about taking the relationship forward. We feel really optimistic about it, and welcome to our first Shangri-La. One of the things that really struck me in that first meeting was the focus that you had, Peter, and that the administration has on the Indo-Pacific, and obviously this is an opportunity to give expression to that. We really welcome that. We very much look forward to this meeting, but also the other interviews.
Yep, that's why we're here. It's a partnership as strong and robust as it's ever been, and is important considering the issues we face in the region and the world. So, beautiful.
Still ahead on The World Today. Did you catch it? The rare fireball meteor phenomenon that ran past the night sky over Haikou in China. We have details. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. has reopened with a ceremony marked by calls for peace and renewed condemnation of anti-Semitism following the fatal shooting of 2 Israeli embassy staff on May 21st. Museum Board President Chris Wolf stressed that the museums remain committed to preserving history and building bridges with diverse communities throughout society. Mayor of the District of Columbia, Muriel Bowser, and Senior Rabbi of Adas Israel Congregation, Lauren Holzblatt, also echoed Wolf's sentiment, with Bowser praising the establishment to be a platform serving for the better collective future. U.S. President Donald Trump expressed his condolences to the victims' families and said the shooting is obviously based on anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the attack horrifying, claiming it is the cost of blood libel against Israel amid the ongoing war in Gaza. He also announced increased security measures across Israeli diplomatic missions.
We gather today under the shadow of immense grief. Our hearts are heavy with sorrow and disbelief. Just a week ago, a senseless act of violence took from us 2 bright lights, 2 individuals dedicated to the ideals this museum stands for, Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram. Yaron and Sarah were young, full of life, and deeply committed to building bridges of understanding and promoting peace. Even in this darkness, we must also find strength. Today, as we mourn, we also gather to reaffirm the unwavering commitment of the Capitol Jewish Museum to its founding mission, to preserve history, to foster understanding, and to build bridges with diverse communities that make up our community.
A former Royal Marine who is accused of deliberately driving his car into a crowd after Liverpool FC's trophy parade, leaving 79 people injured, has appeared in court. 53-year-old Paul Doyle appeared at both Liverpool Magistrates Court and Liverpool Crown Court on Friday, where he faced 7 charges, including wounding with intent, causing grievous bodily harm with intent, attempting to cause GBH with intent, and dangerous driving. The court heard the prosecution alleged the father of 3 used his car as a weapon when it was driven into the crowds. Mr. Doyle of Burgill Road in West Derby, Liverpool, appeared emotional as he appeared in court for the first time, speaking quietly only to confirm his date of birth and age. No family members or friends were present in either courtrooms. Well, France is banning smoking in areas where young people socialize, including beaches, parks and sports facilities, from July 1st to clamp down on the harmful habit and make it less attractive. The ban, which extends to bus stops, gardens and areas close to schools, is intended to denormalize tobacco and limit its attractiveness, according to the French Health Ministry. The fine for smoking in such areas will now reach €135. The move comes as data shows smoking is at a historically low level in France, and tobacco sales fall more than 11.5% last year. Nonetheless, tobacco consumption still kills 75,000 people each year, equivalent to 200 deaths per day in the country. The health costs amount to €150 billion per year. Today, 90% of smokers start before the age of 18. In 2023, nearly 16% of 17-year-olds in France said that they smoked daily. With the brain still developing at that age, early smoking increases the risk of addiction and long-term health issues. And according to the Health Ministry, we must stop the factory of early smokers. At 17, we build our future, not our addiction. Here in Nigeria, Niger State Governor Umaru Bago has expressed deep sympathy with the people of Mokwa local government area following the recent devastating flood that claimed several lives and destroyed properties. He said in a statement he was extending his heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims and prayed for the peaceful repose of the deceased. He also wished a speedy recovery to those who sustained injuries.
Call it a furious flood, and you won't be wrong. That's the state of affairs in Kege Town in Mokwa local government area of Niger State, following a severe early morning downpour on Thursday, which culminated into a flood disaster in the area, sweeping away anything in its wake. As at the last count, the Niger State Emergency Management Agency has confirmed at least 21 deaths, with 10 others missing as search and rescue operations continue. Meanwhile, the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, says it has activated its MENA Operations Office to deploy search and rescue officers and mobilize support equipment.
I never seen this one before.
On his part, the state governor, Umaru Bago, is commiserating with the people of Mokwa local council area over the disaster, as he directs the State Emergency Management Agency and other concerned groups to take necessary action.
Our thoughts and prayers with those in Niger State at the moment. In the meantime, back here in Africa, well, in other parts of Africa, the continent lost an estimated $67.5 million in non-refundable Schengen visa application fees, according to data from the Lago collection. The London-based research has tracked European short-term visa trends since 2022 and identifies Africa as the region most adversely affected by visa rejections. Our correspondent in South Africa, Innocent Musa, has more.
Nigerians have collectively lost more than 4.5 million euros. That's over $5 million in application fees alone, trying to gain access to the 29 countries that make up the Schengen area. What are the root causes behind this persistent trend? Professor Lauren Landau, a senior researcher at both Wits University and Oxford University, weighs in.
I think the foundational issue to address is that this is not about administrative fairness. This is not a mistake. This is not about an issue with the bureaucrats and the processing. The European Union wants people to know that this system is not fair.
He describes the system as a quick mechanism for draining resources from the African continent.
This is a further way in which the European Union is extracting money from Africa and doing so in a way that is essentially asking Africans to pay for border control.
According to Professor Landau, Nigerians are losing millions of dollars annually to non-refundable visa fees. It's unfortunate, he says, but people will continue to pay, hoping for a chance. So what can prospective applicants do to increase their chances of success? And are there any ongoing policy changes that could make the process more equitable?
What we need is the European Union to hear a message from the Nigerian government, from the African Union and other African governments, that this is unacceptable, and to put at stake European investments, trade, resource extraction, etc., from Africa if they do not treat Africans more fairly in these processes.
As visa costs rise and rejection rates remain stubbornly high, the burden on African applicants continue to grow. With millions lost each year and few clear answers, the call for greater transparency and reform is louder than ever. For many, the question remains, is the system designed to keep them out or to cash in on their hopes? From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Thailand's Korat Zoo has made national history by successfully breeding 13 Aldabra giant tortoise hatchlings. It is the first ever born in the country. Excited visitors stopped by to admire the hatchlings, which were marked with painted numbers on their shells. wandering around a crate and exploring their penned incursion. Sorry about that, it was the wrong video. But the zoo director, Tanachon Kensing, says he was very proud that the zoo was the first in Thailand to achieve this. The hatchlings, now under close veterinary care, are part of a rare species native to the Seychelles and known for the impressive size and lifespan of up to 150 years. And there they are. We can go now to that story on the rare fireball meteor that lit up the skies over Haikou in China's Hainan province. Dashcam footage captured the celestial meteor, you'll see in a moment, streaking across the horizon, leaving a glowing trail of yellow and blue behind. There it goes. Experts from the National Astronomical Observatories confirmed the object of a fireball meteor, a particularly bright type of meteor that burns intensely upon entering Earth's atmosphere. Fortunately, authorities report no injuries or damage. The phenomenon, though dramatic, is natural, but is also being monitored. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.